Hi everyone, I was busy, but today we are talking about combat. Combat is one of the three pillars of TTRPGs like D&D. It provides tension, makes things perilous, and specifies the kind of threats that the player characters are up against. There are a lot of combat videos out there. What makes this one different is that we won't just look at how to make combat better, but we will discuss my philosophy for combat, and why I think most combat, even in popular podcasts like Critical Role, is, how to phrase this? The least interesting part of the show. Let's go with that. This video is for players and GMs both. While GMs can learn how to make combat in general better, players get a unique insight into how to use combat for expressing their story beats. That said, let's get started. Combat is a violent engagement involving at least two different factions duking it out until one of them is unable to continue fighting. Basic definitions down, let's talk about the function of combat. There are, in my opinion, three types of combat: hurdle combat, survival combat, and showcase combat. There might be more, but 99% of combat you encounter in-game will be one of these types. Hurdle combat consists of a type of combat in which the players knowingly and voluntarily engage in combat in order to achieve something. For example, attacking a goblin camp to free a hostage, stealthily trying to dispatch the guard protecting a doorway, or hunting an animal to use its hide are all examples of hurdle combat. Survival combat, on the other hand, is completely different. Where players willingly and knowingly engage in hurdle combat, survival combat has only one goal: survival. Because of this, there is no victory to be achieved, no thing to work towards. The player characters either live or die. Most ambushes or random beast encounters are survival combat. The third and rarest type of combat is showcase combat. Showing off your skills in a fighting arena, or holding out as long as you can against an unstoppable horde of zombies to show your conviction, are all examples of showcase combat. Neither surviving nor achieving any concrete goal is important here. Instead, players engage in showcase combat to express a facet of their character's personality. The main difference between these three types of combat is the amount of agency afforded to the player characters. Hurdle combat allows player characters to plan, strategize, and steer the flow of combat to a degree. While you could probably find a way to do that in all three types of combat, hurdle combat does it most naturally. Showcase combat, on the other hand, allows the player characters to showcase a part of their character, but they can't really change the situation in a meaningful way. Lastly, survival combat is purely passive. Not getting killed isn't particularly unique to the player characters. A lot of people in Fantasy World number 15 spend their time not getting killed every day. There is nothing wrong with either type of combat, you just need to be aware of when to use which type. Combat is the most direct impression of a character's agency and mechanics. It always needs to serve a purpose. If you want the player characters to feel like a new town is hostile and oppressive, well, survival combat is your friend. If your game is a Mission Impossible style gang of specialists doing their thing, you might want to consider hurdle combat. And, of course, if your player characters regularly mingle with noblemen, they might want to show off how knightly they are to their upper-class friends in an amicable joust. These types of combat can even merge into one another. The best and most exciting fights I've had were when desperate survival situations turn into opportunities to steal the MacGuffin of the day, or when a tournament arc suddenly turned deadly. Don't do this too often because it would become predictable otherwise, but every now and again, it's really good. I'm going to say something controversial. I like combat in D&D 5e. Wait. Before you leave to get the pitchfork, hear me out. If combat is the most direct expression of a character's agency, then having a bunch of things on your character sheet that you can do during it is pretty good. It's like a list of all the ways in which you can express your character in combat. That said, combat in D&D does suffer from many problems. I don't think any of these are fundamental, and if we can just take an axe to them, then what we're left with is going to be really great. With that in mind, the core combat problems in D&D are as follows. Runtime. Combat in D&D takes way too long, even with experienced roleplayers. I'd wager the average combat encounter in, let's use Critical Role as an example, takes about 1.5 hours. That's 90 minutes of watching mostly other people roll dice, even if you're a player at the table. No matter how great the combat is, it is difficult to sustain anything good for that amount of time. Repetition. While there are notable exceptions to this, most of D&D combat comes down to think of a move, reposition, roll dice, end turn, watch combat. While combat can be more engaging, absolutely, it usually isn't, and there are only so many ways of dealing damage to things to reduce their hit points to 0. Power imbalance and/or disempowerment. One very specific element is the death of power balance. Even human NPCs have hit points way beyond anything their CR level equivalent player could have. This serves to basically create a world in which even relatively experienced player characters could not comfortably take out a city guard who's never gotten into a real scrap. The hit points are specifically a problem, but the other side of that coin is equally bad. Creatures and NPCs can't do shit compared to the variety that is available to player characters. That makes them feel bland and unexciting in fights, no matter how well the GM roleplays them. And on that note, death of the roleplayer. A combination of all of these things that leads to excited first-time players. I swing my sword as he strikes me, aiming for the throat, to quickly degenerate into I roll, hit, 12 damage, next turn. I get it. We've all heard enough descriptions of combat to last us a lifetime. But it's called a role-playing game, not a combat game. And we are doing dramatic storytelling in D&D, so that counts double. Having identified all of these problems, how do we fix them? I have a few solutions, and by the end, we should have knocked off all of these issues and be left with something really rather good. Goals. You may have noticed that there is some game footage in the background. If not, hey there, I'm probably on your second screen, and I hope whatever's on the first one is going well. Back on track. There's a few lessons we can learn from video games when it comes to combat. Combat in video games is a good litmus test for your planned combat. If this combat was in a video game, would it be fun? It's not the ultimate test, but it does work as an initial check. The first thing in a video game combat that can be translated is goals. Goals take combat from this. To this. What changed here is the addition of goals. There's a reason I showed you a tree. It has a health bar, and we are chipping away at it. It is a large health bar, and depleting it advances the game. By these definitions, it is a boss fight. The reason it's not very exciting is that it doesn't clear the basic line of giving us the goal to survive. The next two ones do that, but they're also kind of boring. When compared to the later fights I showed you, there is one thing that stands out. The later fights have variety. The combatants, us, are pursuing a strategy that is greater than just reduce health bar, Sometimes that's avoid damage in a particular way, or target a weak spot, but that is still a strategy, that is still a goal to follow. So, combat is fun if you add goals. Translate these concepts into TTRPGs and you can immediately improve almost every battle. Instead of just depleting a health bar, adding some goals to advance the combat can turn a number slog into an exciting, dynamic dance. Some goals that you might want to consider are goals like target weaknesses with risk-reward strategies, use or get to an item in the arena, escape rather than fight the monster, convince your opponent to stop fighting, or even solve riddle if you want to marry puzzle and combat in an interesting and new way. Any Medusa fight will almost certainly be a riddle if the stat block is done right. How can you fight something that you can't look at? Dynamic combat. Avoiding damage in a particular way or engaging combat with specific behaviours is all well and good, but it goes further than that. By sprinkling dynamic situations into combat, you can shake up the monotony of attack, damage, positioning. That can be dynamic environment, such as rotating platforms, an advancing river that's threatening to flood, or even powerful environmental damage potential, like ballistas or lava, that your players can use. This introduces a new dynamic into the battle, one of movement, risk, reward, and novelty. In much the same way, you can overhaul your battle's dangers as well. Hear me out. What is more exciting? I roll, I tell a player they are hit and take 8 bludgeoning damage, or I describe how the ground begins to bubble and become slick. It seems like if you can't find solid ground or interrupt the enemy spellcaster, this ground will become acidic quicksand. What did I do here? I changed the dynamic of the battle in a way that forces players to respond. That makes enemies dangerous, seemingly clever, and it keeps battles fresh. Every battle needs to be considered as to how to approach it. There's no "we just attack and then we're done" solution here, not unless you've got a hell of a lot of hit points to spare. The final flourish to dynamic battles is to give the power to your players. How does that work? Well, one solution I've had great results with was to give my players layer actions. If they are attack, or even manage to lure an attacker into their home base and/or ambush, why not give them an advantage for clever preparation? On the initiative count of 20, they can take one of several pre-prepared layer actions. Or, if you want to cut down on the prep on the initiative count of 20, one of the players can take an additional action. This simple concept can be broadened. If the players can prepare for a fight, it will almost always be better. Unless you're going for a grueling survival combat, and remember what I said about that, it will be much more fun for your players if they can scheme and prepare beforehand. Let them investigate. Maybe they figure out that this enemy uses area of effect attacks a lot, or has a specific damage weakness. Perhaps there is a phrase or a provocation that lets this calculated warrior fly into a bloody rage. If your players know beforehand that a fight has dynamic elements, they can start making goals for themselves, which is a great interplay between dynamic combat and goals, both of which already make combat way better than just running it as normal. Meaning. Perhaps the most important element to players liking your combats is meaning. Combat should always have meaning. If the combat doesn't serve a purpose except for delaying the players, then it's not fun. It's a waste of time, and it will feel that way. Be careful though, that doesn't mean that a villain delaying the player characters through a fight is boring as well. Only when you, the GM, mean for this fight to be nothing but a delay does it really become tedious. What are some of the meanings combat can have? On the very basic level, combat can advance the plot. If there is a weapon, magic, science, anything even remotely combat related going on in the plot, then a survival combat as the player characters barely survive this new and scary thing is always a good idea. This type of combat, expository showcase / survival combat, serves the plot. People usually fight for either ideological or survival reasons. I strongly recommend the first one over the latter, though you can use both, just make sure that not every fight occurs cause we need to live. Combat, on a deeper level, can also be used to express something about the story we're trying to tell. I once GM'd a story about a classist society, where the player characters were disconnected from the common folk. So when one of the player characters, a monk, got attacked in the streets, the player was like, okay, I know what's going on here, survival combat. So they start dealing damage, and at 10th level in D&D 5e, that was a lot of damage. They start rolling, and after the first mumbled damage number, I describe how the player character absolutely brutalizes the face of their attacker, dealing twice the damage required to kill this person. Horrified, the player character looks at their bloody knuckles as the player realizes this isn't survival. At least not for them. This is Showcase, displaying how the common folk are powerless against the rich and powerful elite of the city. Like in that story, combat can, and usually should, reveal new information or express an aspect of the story. This is also why I'm not a fan of the usual random encounters that systems like D&D have. There's been a lot of talk on them already, so I'm going to say only this. You want to have good, fun, random encounters, then you are going to have to design your own table, where every encounter adds something to the world and plot that wasn't prominent before. Every one of these encounters needs to mean something, no matter how little. Meaning is less of a tangible thing to add to combat and more of a reason, outcome, or method you lay on top of your combat. There's a lot that a fight can mean. Character moments, exposition, plot reveals, even romance. They can all happen during combat. Truly good TTRPG combat always has more under the surface than it initially seems. Mechanics. Usually, I prefer to be a bit of a nebulous storyteller, with lots of talk about agency and dramatic tension, etc. Not right now. I'm going to talk some hard facts that I learned in my roundabout half a decade of running D&D. And this is specifically about D&D fights, so feel free to skip to this time in the bottom of the screen if you don't come here for D&D stuff, which is understandable. I prefer running NPC vs PC combat to creature vs PC combat. That doesn't have a reason, it's just the style of game that I enjoy. I'm not unfamiliar with either of them though, and if there's one thing D&D does wrong, even with the new edition, it's this. The HP pools are too goddamn big. According to D&D, a regular human guard can sustain like 4 hits from a normal sword before they even start getting concerned. To quote the words of Brennan Lee Mulligan, most people, if stabbed by a sword, will die. This gets way worse the higher up in CR we go, until we've reached this weird state where the player characters are supposed to be the special people in the story, but Joe Smith, random weirdo from the Mages Academy, has more hit points than all of them together, because they might become an antagonist at some point. It's important to me that you understand that I'm not complaining about this for realism reasons. Realism has no place in dramatic storytelling, but instead because this kind of bloated HP pool is both depowering for the players and boring to fight through. D&D was designed in a very particular way, for a particular style of play with long rests, prolonged battles, and that's just not the way most people play it anymore. Just look to popular actual players such as the aforementioned Critical Role or High Rollers. They barely use hit dice anymore. Let's not pretend that D&D 5 is perfect when it comes to combat. Let's create something fun and interesting instead. Let's look back at our problems and see if we've solved them. By increasing the damage and reducing enemy hit points, we have decreased combat runtime. Clever player preparation can exploit weaknesses of enemies in dynamic battles, so that cuts down on the runtime even more. Problem solved. Dynamic battles and changing goals keep combat interesting and fresh, even if it should run long. In addition, due to the combat introducing fresh ideas, plot beats, or meanings, even actual repetition feels less grating. Problem solved, I'd say. Power balance. I don't really need to talk about this one. The stat adjustment and putting the preparation on the player's hands take care of both mechanical and theatrical power imbalance, putting the players at least equal footing with random guard Joe Smith, if not more. Problem definitely solved. kind of arose from the other problems already, but by giving combat meaning and a new flow, both boredom and plot relevance have been solved. Now player characters can react, plot, prepare, decide which goals they want to pursue, and have opinions on the meaning and twist of the combat. Problem solved. All in all, I think we did a pretty good job overhauling the concept of combat without changing too much about it. If you want to hear more about meaning, making monsters, and how combat ties into a setting, stay tuned for my next bit of content rolling down the line. Besides this normal video format, I'll be a little bit more traditional for this type of content, and make a mini-series on building your own setting for dramatic storytelling in D&D 5e. Stay tuned for that, and as always, happy storytelling, everyone.